There was a woman who stood at the edge of breaking more times than anyone will ever know. Life did not play fair with her. People misunderstood her. Situations crushed her. Dreams fell apart in her hands. Yet somehow she never fully shattered. Why? Because she was a woman God refused to let break. Every time the weight became too heavy, God carried what she could not. Every time she felt she had nothing left, God gave her just enough strength to stand one more day. She thought she was surviving on willpower, but in reality, she was surviving on divine protection. There were moments when she prayed for things to work out, and instead everything fell apart. But what she didn't see was that God was removing what would have destroyed her later. He wasn't punishing her, He was protecting her. The things that didn't happen saved her from things that would have broken her spirit. She cried in private while smiling in public. She kept showing up even when she was tired, wounded, and disappointed. And every time she was about to quit, something unseen pushed her forward. That wasn't coincidence. That was God saying, "You are not done yet." When people walked away, God stayed. When doors closed, God built new ones. When she felt weak, God became her strength. What looked like setbacks were actually setups for a greater story. She didn't become strong because life was easy. She became strong because God was with her through everything that was hard. The fire did not consume her. It purified her. The storm did not drown her. It taught her how to stand. Pressure is part of every meaningful transformation. God does not remove all pressure from your life because pressure is what reveals what you are made of. A diamond is not formed without intense force, and in the same way, a woman chosen by God is not shaped without resistance. The weight she carried was not meant to crush her. It was meant to shape her. Every difficult season was carefully measured by God, never more than she could endure, even when it felt unbearable. There were moments when it felt like everything was pressing in at once. Responsibilities, heartbreak, uncertainty, loneliness, and fear. She thought she was about to collapse, but God stood as a boundary around her, saying, "This is as far as it goes." The struggle could push her, but it could not destroy her. The storm could shake her, but it could not break her foundation. God understands the difference between refining fire and destructive flames. He allows heat to remove weakness, doubt, and fear, but He never lets the fire consume the core of who she is. Even when she felt fragile, God was preserving her spirit. Even when she was exhausted, God was sustaining her strength. The pressure was doing a divine work, stripping away what didn't belong and strengthening what did. Many times she thought she was being punished, but she was actually being protected. What felt like overwhelming pressure was really God preventing deeper damage. If certain doors had stayed open, they would have destroyed her emotionally. If certain relationships had lasted, they would have drained her completely. So God allowed pressure to push her out of what was harmful. Pressure also taught her how to lean on God instead of relying only on herself. It forced her to pray when she wanted to quit. It forced her to trust when she could not see. Through the weight of life, she discovered the depth of her faith. She learned that God was not just present in easy moments. He was closest when things were hardest. This is why she did not break. She bent. She stretched, but she struggled, but she did not shatter because God was controlling the pressure, and His purpose was never destruction. It was transformation. There were days when her pain felt meaningless, when every tear seemed wasted and every heartbreak felt unnecessary. She kept asking, why is this happening to me? But what she could not see was that her pain was never random. God was working on a level far beyond her understanding, using every difficult moment to shape a future she had not yet imagined. Pain has a way of slowing you down and forcing you to look deeper. It pulls you away from shallow living and brings you face to face with your true self. God allowed her to feel what she felt so she could grow into who she was meant to be. The hurt was not there to destroy her, it was there to prepare her. Every disappointment taught her discernment. Every betrayal taught her boundaries. Every delay taught her patience. Every loss taught her to trust God instead of what she could hold in her hands. What felt like suffering was actually training. God was building wisdom inside her that comfort never could. There were wounds she wished she never had, but those same wounds gave her compassion for others. She became someone who could understand pain, not judge it. She learned how to love deeply because she had been hurt deeply. God was turning her pain into a source of strength and empathy. Even the moments that nearly broke her were shaping her spirit. God was carving resilience into her soul. He was teaching her how to stand alone when no one else stood with her. He was showing her that her worth did not come from approval, success, or relationships, but from Him. She could not see the whole picture, but God could. What felt like chaos was actually divine order. What felt like loss was actually preparation. Her pain was not the end of her story. It was the part that made the rest of it possible. There were moments when she felt frustrated watching time pass while nothing seemed to move. Prayers went unanswered. Doors stayed closed. Opportunities slipped away. She wondered why everyone else seemed to be moving forward while she was standing still. What she didn't realize was that God was not holding her back. He was holding her safe. Some things she wanted would have led her into heartbreak, exhaustion, and regret. Some people she was asking God to bring closer were actually meant to stay away. So God delayed what she asked for, not because He didn't care, but because He cared too much to let her walk into something that would harm her spirit. God sees what we cannot see. He sees the intentions behind smiles, the truth behind promises, and the future behind every decision. When He delays something, it is because He knows the outcome if it happens too soon. The waiting was not wasted time. It was divine protection at work. Every time something didn't happen when she expected it to, it was saving her from emotional damage she never had to experience. That job that didn't come through protected her from burn. That relationship that didn't work out protected her from deeper heartbreak. That opportunity that passed by protected her from losing herself. Waiting also taught her patience and trust. It showed her that she didn't have to rush into everything just because she felt pressure. God was teaching her to move with purpose instead of panic, to trust His timing instead of her anxiety. What felt like delay was actually God building a shield around her life. He was keeping her from settling for less than what He had planned. He was guarding her future while she was struggling in the present. There were nights when she cried until her heart felt empty, when the pain was too heavy to hold inside. Those tears didn't feel powerful. They felt weak, but God was doing something sacred with every tear she shed. None of them were wasted. Each one was quietly becoming a seed planted in the soil of her spirit. Crying was not a sign of defeat. It was a release of what she could no longer carry alone. God allowed her to feel deeply because deep feeling creates deep healing. Every tear washed something away. Fear, anger, disappointment, hopelessness, making room for something stronger to grow inside her. What broke her heart also built her endurance. Every time she cried and still got up the next day, her strength increased. She was learning how to keep going even when her emotions were overwhelmed. God was training her not just to survive pain, but to rise from. The tears she cried in secret were watering her future confidence. The moments when she felt fragile were actually forming her resilience. She became stronger not by avoiding pain, but by walking through it with God holding her up. Over time, she realized she was not the same woman who first began crying. Each season of sorrow added depth to her faith. Her tears softened her heart without breaking her spirit. God was turning sorrow into courage and heartbreak into wisdom. If God closed doors to keep her from walking into harm, there were doors she prayed would open, opportunities she begged God to allow, and relationships she desperately wanted to keep. When those doors shut, it felt like rejection, felt like failure. It felt like God was saying no to her dream. But in reality, God was saying no to her destruction. Some paths look good on the surface, but are filled with traps underneath. God sees what lies ahead, the emotional damage, the spiritual exhaustion, the quiet heartbreak that would come if she kept going in that direction. So he closed the door before she could step into something that would have wounded her deeply. At the time, she couldn't understand why something that felt so right was taken away. But God was saving her from pain she never had to experience. He was protecting her from people who would have used her, drained her, or made her doubt her worth. He was shielding her from situations that would have slowly broken her confidence. Closed doors were not signs of abandonment. They were signs of divine care. God was acting like a loving guardian, blocking the path to danger, even when she couldn't see it. What felt like loss was actually safety. Each closed door redirected her to something healthier, something stronger, something more aligned with her purpose. God was making sure she did not settle for what looked good but would end badly. He was guiding her away from harm and toward what would truly support her growth. There were seasons when she prayed and heard nothing in return. No signs, no clear answers, just silence. And in that quiet, she wondered if God had forgotten her. But God's silence was never absence. It was preparation happening beneath the surface, just like a seed grows in darkness before it breaks through the soil. God was working in unseen ways. While she felt ignored, he was aligning things in her favor. While she felt alone, he was strengthening her faith. The silence was not rejection. It was a sacred pause before something greater. God uses silence to teach trust. When everything is quiet, there is nothing to lean on except him. In those moments, she learned how to walk by faith instead of sight. She learned how to keep believing even when there was no evidence yet. The quiet seasons built her spiritual strength. They taught her patience, endurance, and inner peace. God was removing her dependence on constant reassurance and replacing it with deep, unshakable faith. What felt like being ignored was actually being prepared. God was shaping her heart to handle what was coming next. He was building maturity, courage, and confidence within her during those silent moments, making sure she would be ready for the next chapter of her life. There were moments when she felt pushed aside, overlooked, or unwanted. People chose others over. Opportunities went to someone else. Relationships ended without closure. Each rejection felt like a message that she wasn't enough. But God was never agreeing with that message. He was redirecting her life. What she called rejection, God called realignment. He was moving her away from places and people that could not support the future he was building for her. If she had stayed where she was not valued, she would have slowly forgotten who she was. So God allowed rejection to push her out of what was comfortable but unhealthy. Every time she was turned away, it was guiding her closer to where she truly belonged. God was leading her to spaces that would recognize her worth, honor her voice, and respect her heart. Rejection was simply a door closing so a better one could open. Sometimes God removes people not because she failed, but because they were not meant to walk with her any further. He was protecting her from being in places where she would have to shrink to fit. He was steering her toward environments where she could grow freely. What felt like abandonment was actually divine direction. God was shaping her path, even through painful goodbyes, leading her toward a future that would be kinder to her spirit and stronger for her purpose. There were times when life felt unbearable, when heartbreak, betrayal, disappointment, and exhaustion came all at once. She felt like her emotions would spill over, like the weight of the world would crush her spirit. Yet even in those moments of intense vulnerability, God was acting as a shield, protecting her from total emotional collapse. He didn't always remove the pain, but he prevented it from destroying her completely. Every time she thought she couldn't handle another setback, God gave her just enough grace, just enough clarity, and just enough hope to keep standing. He buffered her from despair, quietly holding her together when she could no longer hold herself. God's protection often came in ways she didn't recognize at first. Sometimes it was a timely word, a sudden clarity, or a comforting presence at the right moment. Sometimes it was a door that closed or a person who stepped away, keeping her from experiencing harm she wasn't ready to endure. Even the people who disappointed her and the situations that challenged her were being used by God to shield her from deeper wounds. Through this divine shielding, she learned resilience and emotional endurance. She discovered that she could survive pain and disappointment without losing herself. Even when life tried to shake her to her core, God's protection ensured that her spirit remained intact. She realized that her emotions could be intense, but they didn't have to be destructive. Every tear, fear, every anxious thought was held in God's hands, and He prevented them from consuming her completely. What seemed like fragile moments were actually the very times God was reinforcing her inner strength. Because of this divine protection, she emerged from every storm with more clarity, more faith, and a deeper understanding of her own capacity to endure. God didn't allow her to break emotionally because He was preparing her to rise stronger, wiser, and more resilient than before. There were moments when it seemed like life, circumstances, and even people were all aligned against her. She faced betrayal, heartbreak, failure, and trials that seemed impossible to overcome. At the time, it felt like the weight of the world was pressing down, and every challenge appeared to be trying to break her. But God, in His infinite wisdom, turned what was meant to destroy her into the very foundation of her testimony. Every wound, every heartbreak, every rejection, and every disappointment carried a lesson, a message, and a purpose. The pain that once felt unbearable became the story she would share to inspire and uplift others. What once brought tears became the proof of God's faithfulness. Each trial was a building block in a life that would shine as a beacon of hope to those struggling around her. Even when she felt defeated, she was actually being refined. The very situations that threatened to take her down were being transformed into her greatest strengths. God used the challenges to cultivate resilience, wisdom, and compassion in her heart. What seemed like suffering was actually a preparation for her to become a source of encouragement and guidance to others. The mistakes, the losses, and the betrayals did not define her. They became the chapters of a story that demonstrated God's power to redeem, restore, and elevate. She learned to see setbacks not as failures, but as steps in a divine plan that would ultimately lead to victory. Her testimony became a powerful tool, showing others that no situation is permanent and no pain is wasted in God's hands. People could see her scars and know that they were not marks of defeat, but symbols of survival, faith, and transformation. The very things that tried to destroy her life became the reason her life could now inspire, heal, and give hope to others. Through it all, she realized that what she endured was not in vain. Every moment of struggle, fear, or loss was being woven into a tapestry of victory that would tell the world God can turn every hardship into purpose, every setback into strength, and every attempt to break you into a testimony that glorifies Him. Every challenge she faced was shaping something inside her that comfort never could. The struggle was not just about surviving hard times, it was about becoming someone stronger, wiser, and more grounded. God was using difficulty as a refining fire, burning away fear, doubt, and weakness while revealing her true strength. When life was easy, she didn't have to think deeply or grow intentionally. But when everything became hard, she was forced to rise. Every setback taught her perseverance. Every disappointment taught her emotional strength. Every obstacle taught her how to stand even when the ground beneath her felt unstable. The struggle showed her who she really was. It revealed courage she didn't know she had. It taught her how to keep going even when she felt tired, confused, or hurt. God was building endurance into her spirit, preparing her to handle bigger responsibilities and greater blessings. Through the struggle, she learned discipline, patience, and faith. She stopped running from challenges and started facing them with strength. What once scared her began to strengthen her. God was molding her into someone who could handle both success and adversity with grace. The pressure didn't ruin her. It refined her. It stripped away what was fragile and strengthened what was lasting. The struggle became the tool God used to turn her into a woman of depth, resilience, and quiet power. There were moments when she felt she could not take one more step. When the weight of life, disappointment, and pain pressed down on her, she believed she was about to collapse. She cried out for relief, wondering if she would ever see a way forward. Yet it was precisely at these moments when she felt weakest, most exhausted, and on the verge of giving up that God was orchestrating her breakthrough. The breaking point is often misunderstood. It is not a place of failure, but a divine pivot. It is the point where human strength ends and God's power begins. When she could no longer carry the burden alone, God stepped in with supernatural strength and wisdom to carry her beyond what she thought was possible. What felt like the end was actually the beginning of something new. Every tear, every prayer, every moment of doubt was laying the foundation for her next chapter. Her breaking point forced her to surrender control, to release her need to fix everything herself, and to trust God fully. In that surrender, he provided clarity, direction, and courage that she could not have accessed any other way. The situations that pushed her to the edge also stretched her faith. She discovered resilience she never knew existed. She discovered that her strength was not measured by how much she could endure alone, but by how deeply she could lean on God. Each crisis became a crucible, melting away fear and refining her purpose. Her breakthrough often came in disguise. What seemed like loss, failure, or delay was actually God clearing the way for her victory. Each closed door, each disappointment, each painful encounter was rearranging circumstances, aligning opportunities, and preparing her to step into a season of triumph she hadn't yet imagined. She learned that the place she feared most, the breaking point, was the exact location God wanted her to experience transformation. Pain turned into power. Weakness became strength. Desperation became clarity. And every broken piece of her past became the building blocks for a future filled with hope, faith, and unshakable confidence. Her breaking point was never the end. It was the divine signal that something greater was waiting. God allowed her to reach her limit so that she could finally experience the depth of his power working through her life, turning what could have been her collapse and into the moment of her greatest breakthrough. Every challenge she faced was shaping something inside her that comfort never could. The struggle was not just about surviving hard times. It was about becoming someone stronger, wiser, and more grounded. God was using difficulty as a refining fire, burning away fear, doubt, and weakness while revealing her true strength. When life was easy, she didn't have to think deeply or grow intentionally. But when everything became hard, she was forced to rise. Every setback taught her perseverance. Every disappointment taught her emotional strength. Every obstacle taught her how to stand even when the ground beneath her felt unstable. The struggle showed her who she really was. It revealed courage she didn't know she had. It taught her how to keep going even when she felt tired, confused, or hurt. God was building endurance into her spirit, preparing her to handle bigger responsibilities and greater blessings. Through the struggle, she learned discipline, patience, and faith. She stopped running from challenges and started facing them with strength. What once scared her began to strengthen her. God was molding her into someone who could handle both success and adversity with grace. The pressure didn't ruin her. It refined her. It stripped away what was fragile and strengthened what was lasting. The struggle became the tool God used to turn her into a woman of depth, resilience, and quiet power. There were moments when she felt she could not take one more step. When the weight of life, disappointment, and pain pressed down on her, she believed she was about to collapse. She cried out for relief, wondering if she would ever see a way forward. Yet it was precisely at these moments when she felt weakest, most exhausted, and on the verge of giving up that God was orchestrating her breakthrough. The breaking point is often misunderstood. It is not a place of failure, but a divine pivot. It is the point where human strength ends and God's power begins. When she could no longer carry the burden alone, God stepped in with supernatural strength and wisdom to carry her beyond what she thought was possible. What felt like the end was actually the beginning of something new. Every tear, every prayer, every moment of doubt was laying the foundation for her next chapter. Her breaking point forced her to surrender control, to release her need to fix everything herself, and to trust God fully. In that surrender, he provided clarity, direction, and courage that she could not have accessed any other way. The situations that pushed her to the edge also stretched her faith. She discovered resilience she never knew existed. She discovered that her strength was not measured by how much she could endure alone, but by how deeply she could lean on God. Each crisis became a crucible, melting away fear and refining her purpose. Her breakthrough often came in disguise. What seemed like loss, failure, or delay was actually God clearing the way for her victory. Each closed door, each disappointment, each painful encounter was rearranging circumstances, aligning opportunities, and preparing her to step into a season of triumph she hadn't yet imagined. She learned that the place she feared most, the breaking point, was the exact location God wanted her to experience transformation. Pain turned into power. Weakness became strength. Desperation became clarity. And every broken piece of her past became the building blocks for a future filled with hope, faith, and unshakable confidence. Her breaking point was never the end. It was the divine signal that something greater was waiting. God allowed her to reach her limit so that she could finally experience the depth of his power working through her life, turning what could have been her collapse and into the moment of her greatest breakthrough. Even when the storms of life raged around her, God placed a calm in her heart that no circumstance could shake. The chaos was loud, pressures were high, and fear threatened to overwhelm her. Yet in the midst of all this, she discovered a supernatural peace that was not of this world. It was a peace that didn't depend on her circumstances, her understanding, or the people around her. It came directly from God. This peace allowed her to stand firm when everything else seemed unstable. While the world rushed and panicked, she could take a deep breath and trust that God was in control. She realized that storms do not have to define her emotions or determine her responses. Even when life felt out of control, she could rest in the certainty that God's presence was her anchor. God's peace also gave her clarity. In the middle of confusion and uncertainty, it allowed her to make decisions not from fear, but from faith. While others might have crumbled under pressure, she could see the next step clearly because her heart and mind were guided by the calm God provided. This peace was a shield against despair. It did not remove the storm, but it kept her spirit safe and steady. While others around her may have given up, she endured, sustained by the quiet whisper of God's assurance. She learned that peace is not the absence of trouble, but the presence of God in trouble. Through this divine calm, she gained confidence in her resilience. She learned that storms are temporary, but the peace of God is lasting. Each wave that tried to pull her under became an opportunity to anchor herself more firmly in faith, knowing that no matter how violent the storm, God's peace could carry her through. It was in these moments that she began to understand that peace is a gift that strengthens the soul, steadies the mind, and protects the heart. It allowed her to face life's fiercest challenges without crumbling, proving that God's hand is always there to calm the raging waters around her. Fear tried to dominate her at every turn. It whispered doubts, magnified failures, and paralyzed her with what ifs. There were times when the unknown loomed so large that it seemed impossible to move forward. But in the midst of uncertainty, her faith refused to bow, refused to surrender to fear, and over time, her faith outlived it. Faith is not the absence of fear. It is trusting God in spite of it. She learned to acknowledge her fears without letting them control her decisions or her heart. Every moment of trembling, every anxious thought became an opportunity to place her trust deeper in God's hands. She discovered that fear loses its power when faith is allowed to lead. Her faith was tested repeatedly. Every delay, rejection, or disappointment could have caused her to give up, yet she held on. She held on to the promises she could not yet see, the plans she could not yet understand, and the power of a God who never fails. Each test strengthened her belief that God's timing and wisdom are greater than her fears. Over time, she realized that fear is temporary, but faith endures. The things that once paralyzed her, uncertainty, loss, betrayal, could no longer define her life. Every challenge became proof that God's faithfulness surpasses any threat fear can pose. Her faith also inspired those around her. People witnessed her courage and resilience, and they saw a woman who faced life's storms with unwavering hope. Her strength came not from avoiding fear, but from letting faith rise above it. She became a living example that fear may knock, but it doesn't have to settle. Ultimately, her faith became the anchor of her life. It kept her steady when the winds of doubt and anxiety blew fiercely. It allowed her to move forward when her heart was heavy. Fear came and went, but her faith remained enduring, unshakable, and victorious. Through faith, she discovered that no fear is stronger than the God who fights for her, protects her, and will never let her fall. Every challenge she faced, every obstacle in her path, and every season of hardship was part of a larger story that God was writing, a story of victory, triumph, and divine purpose, even when she could not see the outcome, even when every circumstance seemed stacked against her. God was orchestrating every detail, ensuring that she would not just survive, but overcome. Each trial was a chapter in her story of strength. The difficulties were not random. They were carefully placed to teach, shape, and prepare her for the life God had planned. Every heartbreak, setback, and disappointment was a stepping stone leading her closer to the fulfillment of her destiny. God was never absent. He was actively moving behind the scenes, arranging the pieces of her life with precision. Through pain, she learned endurance. Through waiting, she learned patience. Through loss, she learned trust. And through every setback, she discovered resilience she never knew she possessed. God used these trials to build a foundation so strong that nothing in the future could shake it. What felt like struggle in the moment was actually the process of victory being written into her life. She came to understand that victory is rarely immediate or easy. It is crafted through perseverance, faith, and a willingness to keep moving even when the path seems unclear. Every tear, every challenge, every lonely moment was like ink on the pages of her life, a record of how God was shaping her into someone who would not only endure but triumph. Even the obstacles meant for harm were transformed into tools for her growth. God's hand was present in the timing, the protection, and the lessons hidden within each trial. What looked like difficulty was actually divine choreography, leading her step by step to a destiny filled with blessings, her strength and purpose. Her story was proof that God's victories are not always loud or immediate, but they are deliberate and unstoppable. Every trial was a brushstroke, every challenge a building block, and every moment of endurance a sign that God's plan for her life was unfolding beautifully, perfectly, and victoriously. Every trial she faced was not random. It was a part of a divine blueprint for her life. Life threw challenges at her. Betrayal, disappointment, heartbreak, and countless moments that could have broken her spirit, yet each one was carefully orchestrated by God to shape her into the woman she was meant to become. What seemed like struggle or setback in the moment was actually the groundwork for triumph that she would one day fully realize. God's hand was in every detail, even when she could not see it, when doors closed, when relationships ended, or when opportunities slipped away. He was redirecting her toward paths that would lead to true blessing and alignment with his purpose. Every difficult was a lesson, every pain a preparation, and every delay a form of divine protection, ensuring that she would emerge stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The trials did more than test her. They revealed her inner strength. She discovered courage she didn't know she had, patience she hadn't realized existed, and faith that could endure storms others could not imagine. Her challenges were not signs that she was failing. They were evidence that God was shaping her into someone capable of handling greater responsibilities, bigger opportunities, and deeper levels of faith. Even the moments that felt like defeat were part of God's strategy. He was teaching her endurance, refining her character, and equipping her heart with resilience that could not have been formed without hardship. Every tear, every sleepless night, and every moment of doubt became a stepping stone to a victory that was uniquely hers. Ultimately, God's purpose is not to see her broken, but to see her elevated. Every trial was a chapter in the story of her triumph, and he was writing it with care, precision, and perfect timing. The very challenges that seemed impossible to overcome were the exact experiences that would prepare her for lasting victory and unshakable faith. She began to understand that true victory is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of divine guidance through it. Each trial, no matter how painful, was God's way of ensuring that her life would reflect strength, resilience, and a testimony of his unfailing faithfulness. Every trial was a seed, and God was cultivating it into a harvest of triumph, purpose, and glory that would define her legacy.